So it's good to be back with you all. I missed you. I was visiting my home state of Ohio, and for the first time since I moved here 2 years ago. Um, it's always challenging and wonderful to get together with the whole family. But really, I would have to say, except for United Airlines' contribution to the trip, it was very good. Our flight back here on a week ago Thursday night was postponed and for 12 hours till the next morning. And my daughter Meredith, the caterer who brought our food today, she had to get home and shop and cook the next day. So we drove through the night and got here, and neither of us slept. But all's well that ends well, and I can say that I am very grateful that I made the choice to be here in Grand Junction. I love where I came from, and I love being here. So those are part of my lessons. You'll probably hear more of them as the weeks go on. So this week, we celebrated the birth of our country and the energy of those people who brought about the idea of freedom that came to establish America, to seek another way. And the reason it's still pertinent to us is that we're still seeking to establish freedom and equality. And part of what unity stands for is freedom on a lot of levels. So when you look at freedom and you think about what does that mean, there's a lot of answers to that. I want to share a few with you just so we start our minds thinking about that. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants to without hindrance or restraint. Absence of subjection to foreign domination or despotic government. The state of not being imprisoned or enslaved. The state of being physically unrestricted and able to move easily. The state of not being subject to or affected by any particularly undesirable thing. The power of self-determination attributed to the will. The quality of being independent of fate or necessity, and familiarity or openness in speech or behavior. Now, if you think about it, that does not cover it. Interesting, right? Some of those definitions, you'll soon find that there's limitations on those statements about freedom. For example, just in the first one, the power to act, speak, or think as one wants to, may need some moral guidelines in order not to hinder the freedom of the other people that you're working with. So where do we find ourselves? Where do we find that unlimited view of the meaning of freedom? That's what we're going to explore today. Because another view of freedom, the one probably more important for our purposes, is illustrated best in my mind by the story of philosopher Viktor Frankl. Just to refresh your memories about his story, he survived several years in concentration camps, including Auschwitz, only to discover that his parents and his wife did not make it out alive. He suffered unspeakable cruelty and saw others subjected to the same. Out of that came one of Frankl's most powerful ideas, that we have the ability and the freedom to choose our attitude, even in the most difficult of situations. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants to without hindrance or restraint is essentially what freedom is about. even when the world doesn't hand us roses, and I know we've all experienced that, it's your decision how you react to that trial that determines your own happiness. People can take many things from you, but they cannot control your thoughts. They cannot control your emotions. They cannot control your behaviors. You are the one in control of all of that. So this is where I want us to focus our attention this morning, on the freedom within that contributes to our deep peace and to the peace of the world. Reverend Johannes Christian was on top of the world in July 2001. He had just finished his doctorate degree, his kids were in college, and he was finally able to make ministry his full-time job. Then, while driving on I-70 near Springfield, Ohio, a rock came crashing down through his windshield. A teenager, Jacob McNary, had thrown the rock from an overpass. The rock smashed every bone in Reverend Christian's skull and left him blind and disfigured. It also changed his outlook on life. If you think for a moment, there's a choice that he made. During the court hearings, Reverend Christian told McNary, who pleaded guilty to attempted murder and received a 12-year sentence, he told him, "I forgive you." Christian said it was his obligation as a person of the Christian faith to forgive McNary. It has taken over 40 operations, countless hours of physical therapy, but Christian has regained his strength. In 2015, Reverend Johannes Christian walked from Columbus to Cleveland, which is a 2-hour drive, okay? So it's a long walk, to spread his message of forgiveness and to support his initiative to establish a national day of forgiveness. In one quote he said, "No matter how small a situation or how gigantic a situation, we are called by all faiths to forgive." In June of 2015, a young man walked into a Bible study group at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina. And after sitting with the group for about a half an hour, he began making racially inflammatory statements and pulled out a gun and began shooting. 9 people died. In the courtroom, the families of the victims spoke to the accused, Dylan Roof, and in the depth of their pain, of grief, and loss, they spoke to Dylan of their forgiveness. The people of Charleston later gathered with that same spirit of forgiveness and built a memorial and planned a vigil to repudiate whatever the gunman hoped to accomplish. Mayor Joseph Riley Jr. said this, "A hateful person came to this community with some crazy idea that he'd be able to divide. But all he did was unite us and make us love each other even more." These stories illustrate the liberating power of forgiveness. Forgiveness frees us and aligns us with the highest energy of love. In the book of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 21, Peter comes to Christ and asks, "Lord, if another member of the church sins against me, how often should I forgive? As many as 7 times?" Our master teacher answered, "Not 7, but I tell you, 70 times 7. And we interpret that as much as it takes. It can be a lifelong journey, but that's okay. Forgiveness is our key to freedom. It is first and foremost a choice we make for ourselves. It may or may not involve another person. And if it does, it doesn't even matter if the other person knows. Forgiveness is an inside job. In forgiving ourselves and others, we free ourselves from the negative and often poisonous effects of resentment, so that we can continue to embrace and express our spiritual power. Cannot be victims and still be creative expressions of our infinite power and love at the same time. Reverend Johannes Christian and the people affected by the senseless murders in Charleston living out this truth. Aidan Duncan, a four-sport athlete at the age of 12, excelled in football, basketball, soccer, and baseball. He made the news a few years ago because he's done all this despite the fact that he was born with one arm. When asked if he had any advice for other children that may face challenges such as his own, this 12-year-old said this: "You just got to go through it. Never ask why it happened or why you're like this. You just got to ignore the fact, keep your head up, and if something goes wrong, just keep looking forward. Look to the future and never look back." When I saw the story on ABC News, all I could think was that boy is free. The aspect of freedom that comes to mind for me here is surrender. The idea of surrender used to scare me terribly. It's a challenge. We think we're giving up our power, we're giving up our control. It's a challenge to our ego. We think we know how something should go, and when it doesn't go that way, we feel resentment. Michael Beckwith said in his book, Spiritual Liberation, while we may honestly acknowledge that we would prefer a certain outcome, it is essential to surrender our attachment to how we think our prayer should outpicture. In surrender, we bow to the infinite. Not my will, but thine be done. Early in my unity training, I was taught to end my prayers with this or something better. I hope you all learned that somewhere along the way, too. Easier said than done. In this, we acknowledge and we open to the infinite presence, the infinite love of God. And we activate our faith and our trust in divine love. And one of the things that I've found is, even if you can, remember the story of the mustard seed? Even if you can't do it fully, if you can express your willingness in a tiny way to surrender and open, the infinite love does the rest. I read a beautiful story, really challenged my thinking about this subject. An exhausted young mother had been caring for her 6-year-old daughter for many days. Daughter was dying from pneumonia, and this was in the days before penicillin. And her other little daughter also needed care, and in another room, her mother lay dying. In the night, the mother knelt by her sick daughter's bedside, praying. She finally reached a point of surrender, surrendering her beloved little girl to God's love. She remained on her knees, at last experiencing peace. Then she heard her daughter take a deep breath and sigh deeply, and she opened her eyes and looked, and her daughter was breathing clearly and was peaceful. The fever had broken. She gave thanks, and she went in to tell her mother the good news, and she found her mother also breathing clearly and resting peacefully. When the doctor arrived the next morning expecting that a death was imminent, he saw instead a radiant mother and a house filled with joy and light. The author, Dr. Ruth Deaton, a retired Science of Mind minister, ends the story by saying, "I can attest to the truth of this experience very well. I am the healed little girl." Lesson 194 from the Course in Miracles states, "I place the future in the hands of God." When we can do this, we experience true freedom. We work diligently for what we want, what we think is right. We surrender everything to the highest divine wisdom. A beautiful statement supporting the idea of surrender is this: when you surrender to Spirit, eternity breaks into time as your consciousness, manifesting itself as your life. Be aware of this eternal flow as you soar from glory to glory. And another affirmation: I throw myself wide open, abandoning all fear, negative reaction, and limiting points of view. In gratitude, I rejoice, knowing that Spirit responds by corresponding to its divine nature in me. Author, civil rights activist, and poet Maya Angelou was born April 4th, 1928. As an African American, Angelou experienced firsthand racial prejudice and discrimination in Arkansas. She also suffered at the hands of a family associate around age 7. During a visit with her mother, Angelou was raped by her mother's boyfriend. Then, as vengeance for the assault, Angelou's uncles killed the boyfriend. So traumatized by the experience, Angelou stopped talking. She returned to Arkansas and spent years as a virtual mute. In 1944, a 16-year-old Angelou gave birth to a son, Guy, as a result of a short-lived high school relationship. Thereafter, she worked a number of jobs to support herself and her child. I saw on Facebook a video of her speaking on the liberating power of love, and it inspired me to include the power of love in my talk with you today. In the video, Maya Angelou describes how her mother taught her the liberating power of love by her unconditional acceptance, especially at the time of her teenage pregnancy and the years of struggle to live on her own. She said every time she returned home, her mother welcomed her, and she never said, "I told you so." But instead, she said, "How can I serve you? What can I cook for you?" And she showered love and affection on Maya and her son. In this video, Maya says, "I am grateful to have been loved, to be loved now, and to be able to love, because love liberates. It doesn't just hold. That is ego. Love liberates." At 22, Maya remembers her mother saying to her, "You are the greatest woman I have ever known." Maya says she got on the streetcar to go home, and she said to herself, "What if she's right?" Reflecting on the moment, reflecting on that moment, she says of her mother, "She released me. She freed me. So I could say to myself, I may have something in me that might be of value, maybe not just to me, maybe to others." We all know she had a lot to say. Love liberates. The love of her mother gave Maya freedom. Her story and her many successes, the scope of her influence, demonstrate how the truth of that statement played out in her life. We have the same power available to us. If you were not loved in this way by those who raised you, claim your dominion. In your own life, love yourself. Liberate yourself. Nothing in your past binds you unless you say it does. Forgiveness, surrender, and the liberating power of love. I find these prominently in all scriptures of the world's religions. I offer them to you today to take into your own hearts and examine as you define freedom for yourself. They speak to the inner freedom of our hearts, and I believe then translate into how we live our lives from the inside out and how we affect others that we encounter. I leave you this morning with this quote. I don't know its author, but I find it to be a perfect blessing and a perfect prayer for our continued unfoldment. May we all continue to dissolve the veils of fear and the habits of separation and protection which isolates us, opening to the miraculous, the divine, ever present within and around us every moment. To be love, to be light with every breath, every touch, every beat of our hearts. And so it is. Let's move into meditation now with that thought in our minds. Become very still and quiet, focusing on your breath. Feel that divine connection, that divine oneness that infuses us and binds us. Breathe that in through the top of your head, down into your heart, and then out through your feet. Repeat that at your own pace 2 more times. Breathing in through the top of your head, divine light fills you, fills your heart, and it goes right through you and centers you in the oneness of all. And in our time of remembering freedom, forgiveness, and love, repeat in your mind the words that I will tell you of the loving kindness meditation. May I dwell in the open heart. May I be safe from all danger. May I have healing wherever healing is called for. May I know the ease of well living. Perhaps there's someone or some situation in your life that you're working with forgiveness. So let's repeat that meditation for that situation or that person. May you dwell in the open heart. May you be safe from all danger. May you have healing wherever healing is called for. May you know the ease of well living. And now for this community, for this country, for this world. May all dwell in the open heart. May all be safe from danger. May all have healing wherever healing is called for. May all know the ease of well living. Spend a few moments in that peaceful energy, in that perfect vision. And gently bring yourselves back to this time and place. We say thank you, thank you, thank you, infinite loving Spirit. And so it is.